I'm not sure how to start or explain this, but recently something happened with my husband that has left me feeling hurt, embarrassed, and confused. It's been weighing heavily on my mind, and I haven't been able to bring myself to talk to anyone about it yet. Just for context, my husband, Ken, is 7 years older than me. We met when I was 21 years old and at a really low point in my life. My ex used to be abusive and manipulative, so when I met Ken after my breakup, I found him to be different. Or so I thought. He was the perfect boyfriend to me and was the complete opposite of my ex. He would plan all our dates, was a good listener, and knew what he wanted in his life. He told me very clearly on that he was looking to date someone who he could eventually get married to. Since he was older than me, I was not sure if I should continue to date him as I was not sure about marriage. But as we continued to date, I slowly kept falling in love with him. Now, Ken doesn't have any parents as he lost them in a car accident very early on in his life. I think this was a big reason as to why he always craved having a family of his own. When we started getting serious, I introduced him to my family, and my parents absolutely loved him. Ken was charming and confident, and I could see that my dad immediately liked that. Even my older sister, Jamie, had no negative comments about him. I remember very distinctly that Jamie had commented to me that Ken was a great catch. During this time, my sister was single, so I would often invite her to join us whenever we went out. It was great. Three of us always had a blast together, and I loved seeing them get along so well. There was never a hint of anything more than friendship between them. Eventually, my sister started dating her boyfriend Fred, and we all continued to hang out as couples. While our boyfriends weren't exactly best buddies, they got along fine, and we enjoyed spending time together as a group. However, I would notice sometimes that Ken would get really riled up while talking to Fred. Fred was basically a happy go lucky chap who believed in crystals and astrology. Now, there's nothing wrong with that since he and my sister bonded over it, but Ken was vehemently opposed to it. He would tell me things like how my sister deserved much better than a lunatic, or how Fred was a weirdo. I would try to let it slide. However, once the four of us had gone out for dinner, nowhere fancy, and usually we would each take turns to pay. It was Fred's turn and he didn't have the money, so he asked my sister to pay for it, telling her that he would pay her back. Hearing this, Ken openly mocked him, saying how a real man never lets his lady pay, and how he could take care of Jamie much better than him. We all froze in shock, and I stared at him incredulously. Ken tried to backtrack, saying he meant that she was a sister to him since he was my boyfriend and could take care of her like a family. I shook my head but kept my mouth shut at that time since I didn't want to make things more awkward for us publicly. Later, when I confronted him, he insisted how he had grown close to my family and cared about them like his own. He told me that Fred needed to do better, and I asked him to butt out of their business. I told him that he had no right to speak that way to my sister's boyfriend, and I wasn't going to let it slide the second time. Since then, Ken has kept his mouth shut around Fred. Ken continued to have a good rapport with my parents throughout our dating phase, so it was no surprise that when he proposed to me, I said yes. I did have butterflies and felt anxious about my decision, but I did believe that Ken was the one. We had a grand wedding, and I have to say that Ken left no stone unturned in giving me the wedding of my dreams. My parents did contribute partially to our wedding, but Ken shouldered the major parts. All my friends and cousins were really envious of my wedding and told me how lucky I was to have found an older guy who had his shit together. Throughout all my wedding planning, my mom and Jamie were very much involved in making sure that everything went to plan. We went on a honeymoon to Hawaii, which was a place I had always wanted to visit one day. Ken and I had a wonderful time and everything seemed to be going smoothly for us. The trouble only happened after we came back home. Ken was at work and I was working from home. I work as a graphic designer for a foreign company, so I have the luxury of working remotely from anywhere. There was a knock on my door, and I thought that maybe it was the delivery man. I opened it up to see a pregnant woman standing on my doorstep. She told me she was looking for Ken. I told her he wasn't at home at the moment, but I would be happy to take a message for her. She looked at me intently, biting her lips nervously. I could feel like something was wrong, so I asked her if she was okay. The woman started to cry and asked if she could come in. I was a bit apprehensive, but she genuinely looked pregnant and I didn't want to be cruel. I let her in and gave her a glass of water. Once the woman had calmed down, she asked if I was married to Ken, and I nodded. She then went on to tell me that she had no idea about this when she slept with Ken 4 months back. My stomach dropped as I stared at her and could feel the ground beneath me shaking. She told me she is pregnant and doesn't know what to do since she doesn't want children. She told me how she wanted to abort but didn't have the courage to do so. Hence, she had tracked down my husband from his LinkedIn page. She told me how she had followed him back from his office to our home yesterday evening, but couldn't let herself knock on our door. Since it was a Saturday today, she assumed that he would be home and had come to confront him. Unfortunately for me, my husband was working, hence I was the one who opened the door to her. My heart felt like it dropped into my stomach. I couldn't process what I had just heard. The man I was married to, the man I had supported through thick and thin, had betrayed me. I rushed to the bathroom trying to make sense of it all. How could someone I thought was sweet and kind do something so awful? I had been nothing but supportive and loyal throughout our entire relationship. It felt like a punch to the gut. I started to hyperventilate and everything felt like a bad dream. The woman kept crying and pleading with me to calm down, and I felt sorry for both her and me to be in this predicament. I called my husband and told him that he needed to come home immediately. I don't know whether it was the way my voice was shaking, but he did leave work in the middle of the day to drive back home. When he entered the house, his eyes fell on me sitting with the woman. Immediately, I saw his face drain color. I knew then, without him even admitting, that the woman was right. My husband had indeed cheated on me. The love of my life had got another woman pregnant. Tears ran down my face as my husband came up to me and got down on his knees. He started to tell me how this was all a mistake, and he never meant to hurt me. I kept asking why he would do this to me, and he told me that it was just a one-night stand and that it meant nothing. He then went on to explain how 4 months ago he was too stressed out with our wedding planning and met her in a bar when he and his co-workers were out drinking. She approached him and he found her attractive. They hooked up in the bathroom and that was that. To her credit, the woman agreed with him and told him how she thought she would never see him again until she found out she was pregnant. I shook my head and informed Ken that his one mistake was now going to cost us because she is pregnant with his child. At that moment, I wished I was never married to him. My heart was in pieces. Ken shut his eyes when the lady informed him that she was pregnant with twins. He then asked her, since she was just a stranger to him, so there was no guarantee that it was even his children. The lady agreed to do a paternity test. She told us how she didn't want the babies or any child support. She had been thinking about giving up the babies, but decided to inform him before she did, that since he had a right to know. She told us that we could decide and let her know whatever we wanted, and then she left. The next few days, Ken continued to plead with me to not leave him. He kept telling me how that woman meant nothing to him and that he wasn't in the right mind. There were so many justifications that he came up with, which all boiled down to him saying that this would never happen again. I felt like I was walking through a fog during those days. I would stay curled up in my bed for days because I didn't know what to do. I did want to leave him, but at the same time I felt like I would slip into depression. Everything felt different and broken. I could still remember how devastated Ken looked when the woman told us that she would be giving up the babies for adoption. Ken and the lady did end up getting a prenatal paternity test, which proved that it was indeed his kids. Up until that time, I had a bit of hope that maybe she was wrong, but the pain returned after when I saw the results. Ken sat me down and informed me that he had always wanted to be a father and how this should be a blessing for both of us. I looked at him pissed as he continued to explain how we should think about adopting the babies from the woman. Hearing this, I started yelling at him, asking him if he had in fact gone crazy. I told him that there was no way that he was going to suggest something so ridiculous to me. But Ken tried to pacify me, saying how we were always going to have children down the line, so why not adopt the kids when we have the opportunity to do so? He told me how God was giving me the perfect opportunity to never have to worry about getting pregnant down the line since we would already have these kids. When I was still not convinced, he started talking about how difficult his life was when his parents passed away and how difficult living in an orphanage was. I knew that this was a dark phase in his life, and he did go to several foster homes, which scarred him even further. Ken broke down in tears and begged me to think about this in a cool mind and reconsider my decision. I asked him about what would we even tell my parents, since his cheating incident was embarrassing enough, and I could not let my family find out that I was not going to raise his affair kids. Ken winced at the words and told me how I knew that the woman meant nothing to him, and that when it came to the children, I had nothing to worry about since we could always say that they were adopted. I started to laugh and pointed out how that might be difficult since the kids might start to look like him, but Ken told me that we would cross that road when we had to. He assured me that he would take care of me and the kids and we would be one big happy family. Ken is a really smooth talker, and for the next few days I did catch myself mulling over his idea. It was true that the woman and Ken had no emotional connection, and she seemed like a nice person, since she had been quite truthful to me. She definitely had no intentions about keeping the children, and it didn't make me sad thinking about the twins going into the system. If I didn't leave Ken and decided to stay with him, I don't know if Ken could ever recover from that situation, knowing his children were growing up in strangers' homes. If I did decide to leave Ken, I would have to come clean about his cheating, and this would just hurt my parents as much as it had hurt me. Besides the cheating, Ken was a good husband to me, and I didn't want our marriage to end so quickly. I didn't know if I could forgive him completely, but I decided that if we did decide to adopt the twins, we needed to go about this the legal way. When I informed Ken about this, he was beside himself in joy. He assured me that he would contact a lawyer and ensure that we would have proper documentation of the woman giving up the child to ask for full custody. We also needed to discuss how we could adopt them. I won't get into the details, but this was a long, strenuous process. Throughout all this, I never once told my parents or Jamie anything, and no one was the wiser. The pregnant woman was more than helpful to us and had no issues signing all the papers we needed to adopt her babies. She was happy that she was leaving her kids with us, since she also felt bad about giving them up for adoption. When she went into labor, Ken and I were really stressed, since hers was a high-risk pregnancy, but thankfully nothing happened. She and the twins were both okay. When I held the twins for the first time, I felt like all the hardships I had faced until then were somewhat worth it. I didn't even know I was crying tears of joy while holding them until the nurse pointed it out to me. We brought the babies home, and since then I have found another purpose to live my life. The hardest thing at that point was breaking the news to my family, who had no idea about all of this. My parents were shocked and immediately rushed over to our place. Ken and I stuck to our plan and informed them that we had applied for adoption and had been selected to be the twins' parents. My mother started to cry as she checked on the babies, and my father was taken aback but did hug me while saying how he could not believe that his little girl had babies now. I got so emotional hearing that. The rest of the family, including Jamie, did come and visit us, and they were all surprised with our decision, but understood. No one doubted us, and I was glad, since I didn't want to deal with explaining the truth to them. Besides, I had chosen to let go of Ken's mistakes, and I just wanted to move on with my babies. Trevor and Jack are the best boys I could have ever asked for. They are just adorable and are what you would expect boys to be. They have red hair like their mother, which is probably why no one has ever suspected, until now, that they could be Ken's children. Ken is a doting father to them, but the boys love me more than their father since they are still children. It's been 4 years since we brought them home. Throughout all of this, a lot of things have changed between me and Ken. We have shifted to a much bigger place to accommodate the 2 boys. I have been promoted at my job, so I earn quite well for the first time in my career. We did go for couples counseling, and Ken has done everything in his power to be patient and loyal to me. My sister Jamie and her boyfriend Fred had tied the knot 2 years ago. Their wedding was fun, and we all had a great time. However, 3 months ago we found out that Fred was leaving Jamie, which was quite a shock, since they had been dating for a long time. Fred never disclosed to my parents any reason, but since he and I had a good rapport, he told me how he had found out that Jamie had been cheating on him with a co-worker. This was a huge shock to me, since I had no idea about this. I did try to talk to Jamie about it, but she told me that she didn't want to talk, so I let it go, since I wanted to respect her space. Jamie had to move in with us since the house belonged to Fred's parents, who wanted her out immediately. Ken and I were more than accommodating to her. Jamie was also a good aunt to our boys, so I was glad that she could live with us until she was ready to get back on her feet. Ken was always sweet to my sister as much as he was to me. If he brought me flowers, then he would buy her flowers also. If he brought me an expensive gift, he would buy her a lesser priced jewelry. It would irk me, but my husband and I were doing well for ourselves, so I would let it slide. Besides, Jamie deserved to be pampered a bit since she had been feeling lonely after her divorce. However, I started to notice more and more about how close they were getting. Jamie would always touch his arms or laugh a bit loudly at his jokes. She would also comment to me how sexy she found that my husband took care of the children without bothering me. Last week, when I and my husband were sleeping, his phone vibrated because he got a text. Ken always has this bad habit of keeping his phone underneath his pillow, which means every time his phone vibrates, I can feel that as well. Call it a woman's intuition, but I felt something was definitely off. Ken was snoring, so I quietly took his phone into the bathroom. I knew his password, so I unlocked it to see that an unknown number had sent him a message saying, "I miss you." My heart dropped, and it felt like all my past fears came spiraling into my head. I felt like this was déjà vu and immediately woke him up. He sat up, groggily, asking me what had happened when I shoved the phone under his nose and asked him to explain himself. He stared at the phone for a second and told me that he had no idea who this was. He pointed out to me how this could have been sent to him by mistake, and since this number was not even saved on his phone. He calmed me down as I was pacing around the room and told me how I was overthinking. He assured me that he would never do something like this and had learned from his mistakes the first time. I did feel a bit calm since his explanations did make sense and there were no other messages exchanged between him and that number. I almost forgot about it until yesterday when I walked into my house. I had gone out for groceries, but it was raining, so the store was closed. The twins were watching TV with the volume really up, which was almost deafening. I was about to lower the volume when I heard moaning from upstairs. I looked around and could not find my husband and Jamie around. I walked upstairs and realized that the sound was coming from our bedroom. I swung the door open to see Jamie doing the unspeakable with my husband. A small gasp escaped my mouth as I fell back to the ground in shock. Ken noticed me and went white as a sheet. He immediately put Jamie aside and looked like he had seen a ghost. Jamie, on the other hand, looked nonchalant as she quickly got dressed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own sister, my best friend, had betrayed me. The pain and anger surged through me like a tidal wave. I felt like my world was crumbling around me. How could they do this to me? How long had this been going on behind my back? I wanted to scream, to lash out at them, but I was paralyzed by shock and betrayal. Before I could even process what was happening, Jamie spoke, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Looks like you caught us, sis," she said, her tone mocking. "Guess you're not as smart as you thought." I started screaming abuse at her, telling her how dare she come into my house and sleep with my husband with my kids downstairs. Jamie looked unfazed and replied back that she had done no wrong since she and Ken were in love with each other. Ken immediately started to shake his head and deny this, but Jamie told me how it was clear to her that I wasn't a good wife to him and that I did not appreciate him as much, so she had decided to take matters into her own hands and started to flirt with him. One thing led to another, and she slept with him twice, both times when I was out with my boys doing some work. Only today I had gone alone and came back home earlier than expected. She said she saw an opportunity to take what she wanted, and she didn't hesitate to seize it. Ken tried to approach me, his face a mask of guilt and regret, but I couldn't bear to look at him. The man I had worked so hard to trust again had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But I was more pissed at my sister and her justifications behind why she would sleep with my husband. I screamed at her that I could not bear to look at her face and that she needed to leave the house immediately, otherwise I would call the police on her. Jamie yelled back at me that it should be me who should leave this house, since this was technically Ken's house. She told me I had no right to tell her anything and that I needed to move out with my 2 kids. Ken started to protest, but I stopped him. I looked my sister straight in her eyes and told her, "Fine, but the kids stay." My sister looked at me confused, and this is when I revealed to her that these were technically my husband's kids, since he had slept with another woman years back and got her pregnant. Of course, I would have never left my kids here, but I just needed an excuse to tell her the truth about Ken. She had clearly thought of him as this great man when he was nothing more than a coward and a cheater. The shock on her face was so evident that I could almost feel it. As she turned to my husband demanding explanations, he confirmed the truth of what I had just disclosed. I could feel some kind of satisfaction as I watched her process the truth. She asked my husband why he had not mentioned it before, and he replied that it was none of her business, and went on to clarify how, although he hooked up with her 3 times, including today, he didn't love her, nor did he want to pursue any kind of relationship with her. Jamie's eyes widened in shock, and she asked slowly what he meant by that. Ken went on to tell her that he didn't have any feelings for her whatsoever and had made a huge mistake giving in to her. Jamie broke down. Ken asked her to leave the house so he could talk to me, and knew that having her around would distress me even more. With tears streaming down her face, she packed up and quickly left. I took my boys into their room as I didn't want them to sense that something was wrong. Ken later came into the room and asked me to talk to him. By then, my mind was already made up. I told him in the living room, away from the boys' earshot, that I was done with him. I asked him to pack up and leave, since I could not leave with the boys. He started to plead and cry, but I was so done with his bullshit that I stopped him right there. I told him that he had done what he thought was right for him, and now I was going to do what was right for me. He tried to protest, but I stood my ground. In the end, he did leave with the suitcase full of his clothes. He told the boys that he was going on an urgent work trip so they would not feel something was amiss. This all happened yesterday, and I have woken up today feeling broken. I feel really bad for the twins who probably have no idea that their parents are going to split up. I grew up with parents who still loved each other, and I don't want to subject my kids to the ugliness of divorce yet. I know it would be the right decision to leave Ken. Would I be an a-hole to my kids for divorcing their dad? Update 1. First of all, thank you so much to everyone for your kind words since I wrote this post last week. I am shocked that a lot of you have reached out to me with similar stories, and this has given me the assurance I need that I am heading down the right path. The twins do ask about their dad sometimes since it has been a week, but then they get easily distracted with their toys. Ken texted me this week saying that he is living in a motel at the moment and sent me several long messages saying how my sister was to be blamed for all of this and how she seduced him. I have left him on read. I have no idea where Jamie is, and I honestly do not care. She has not contacted me once since leaving the house. Update 2. First thing I did this week was talk to my parents. I knew Jamie would never have the balls to tell them anything, so when I turned up at their place unannounced, they were surprised but happy to see me and the boys. When I finally told my parents about everything, they were shocked beyond words. I know a lot of you had written to me and that maybe my parents would not believe me, but in my case, my mother didn't even hesitate before hugging me as she and I broke down in grief. My dad looked pissed and started to say how he could never forgive Jamie for doing this to me. Then I told my parents that I had even bigger news to tell them. My parents looked at me worried as I confessed to them about how the twins were actually Ken's kids and were not adopted. My parents' expressions morphed from concern to disbelief as they grappled with this new revelation. They questioned me as I revealed to them about Ken's cheating incident with another woman and how we had adopted the children from her. My parents sat quietly for a moment, looking stunned. I told them that even though the twins were not biologically mine and a product of Ken's discrepancy, I no longer cared about it since I had officially adopted them and I was their mother. I loved them like my own since the first day I brought them back home. My parents assured me that they always have my back, and if I wanted to fight for custody for the children, they would be happy to help. My dad told me that he would help me find the best lawyer in our town so I could start preparing for my divorce. Update 3. Hi everyone. It has been 3 months since my last update. Many of you have reached out to me asking for an update on my situation, so here I am. I'm currently separated from my husband and we are going through the divorce proceedings. Ken and I did talk to the twins about our divorce, and even though they didn't understand all of it, they were sad that we were all no longer going to live in one house. However, we tried to lighten the mood by highlighting the silver lining, the opportunity for double celebrations like Christmas and birthdays. As for Ken, he has offered apologies repeatedly for his betrayal of my sister. While I appreciate his remorse, I have chosen to take his words at face value without placing too much weight on them. For the sake of my children, I want to be polite and civil to him. My parents found out a few months ago that Jamie had been couch surfing with her friends, too ashamed and humiliated to reach out to anyone. However, when her friends no longer wanted her, she had no choice but to reach out to our parents since she also had no job. My dad refused to let her in and let her know that she was no longer his daughter and that he was disgusted with her. I know my mom must be hurting to refuse my sister, but to her credit, she did support my dad. Jamie begged and groveled, but eventually had to leave. I have blocked her since a long time ago, so she has no way of contacting me, and if she ever comes to my property, I will straight away call the police on her. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated. making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, "Yes. That's Nick for you." Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? "I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.